Okay, so we're diving into Crazy Love by Francis Chan.
Always a good one. Where are we starting?
Well, I always find it interesting, which parts of a book someone connects with most. And your selections from Crazy Love, it seems like you're really wrestling with, like, what it actually means to live out your faith.
Yeah.
Not just checking boxes.
Mm-hmm.
Am I on the right track?
You're definitely picking up what Chan's putting down. Yeah, his writing, it tends to spark those kinds of reflections. It's not exactly passive reading, that's for sure.
That's for sure. And he jumps right into, I mean, the way Chan starts Crazy Love always gets me. He's got you picturing the entire universe, like, right away.
Mm-hmm.
Billions upon billions of galaxies before you even think about saying, dear God.
Right.
It's like he's saying, hold on, like, our everyday perspective is, like, way too zoomed in.
Yeah.
Why do you think he starts there? Like, what's the strategy?
It's about context, right? Because, I mean, it's hard to like really grasp the magnitude of who God is when you're, I don't know, when you're caught up in traffic or you're arguing about the dishes or something like that.
Right.
Chan wants to pull us out of that headspace immediately. And so when you grasp, even a little bit of the vastness of creation, like, did you know that a caterpillar has more muscles in its head than we do in our entire bodies?
What? No.
Yeah.
That's terrifying and amazing.
It hits differently, that this is the God we're talking to.
Yeah, it makes you reconsider what it means to be in awe of something.
Exactly, yeah.
It's like that feeling when you actually, like, you step outside on a perfectly clear night and you can actually see the Milky Way.
Yeah.
It makes you feel pretty insignificant, but it kind of makes you catch your breath a little,
Oh, right.
And Chan's basically saying, look, if our picture of God doesn't make us feel profoundly small, then we're probably missing something.
Yeah.
It reminds me of that line from the book. It's something like, if your God is too small to be feared, he's probably too small to be trusted, or something like that.
Exactly. And from that place of awe, I think that's where Chan starts to unpack these attributes of God that we often like toss around without really like thinking about.
Right.
Like his holiness, his eternality, his absolute knowledge of everything.
Right.
It can be pretty unsettling, actually.
Totally unsettling. Especially when he throws out that question.
Yeah.
Can you worship a God who isn't obligated to explain his actions to you? I mean, ouch. That one makes you think twice about all those why me God moments we all have, right?
Right. And I think Chan's pushing back against that very human tendency to try and put God in a box.
Right.
To try and make him small enough to understand. It's like we want God to like fit into our schedules and our plans, but Chan's saying no, like true faith, it begins when we confront the reality that God is infinitely bigger than our limited understanding.
Which, now that you mention it, is kind of the perfect setup for chapter 2. You might not finish this chapter.
Oh, yeah.
Even the title makes you stop and think, wait, what?
It's classic Chan, right? He has that way of just like cutting through the noise and reminding us of what truly matters.
Yeah. And in this case, it's this idea that our lives, even if we live to be 100, are just this tiny blip in light of eternity. I love that analogy he uses of our life being this like 2/5 of a second scene in a movie that's all about God.
Yeah.
It makes you think, like, if we could actually watch the whole movie, all of history from God's perspective, would our little 2/5 of a second even be noticeable?
Right.
It's kind of a mind-blowing concept.
It is. And it's like Chan's not saying our lives are meaningless or anything, but he's like reframing them, showing how our actions, they kind of take on a different weight when you view them in light of eternity,
So it's not about the length of our lives, but about what we do with the time we have.
Exactly. And to illustrate this, Chan tells this like incredible story about this 14-year-old girl, Brick Bronkowski. And she like loved Jesus, lived her faith really boldly, and then tragically died in a car accident, actually on the way to see a movie.
Oh, wow.
But what's crazy is that, like, even in her short life, she impacted more people than many do in a full lifetime.
Wow.
And so her story really brings home Chan's point, What if we lived every day like it was our 2/5 of a second? What would change?
Wow, that's a powerful question.
Yeah.
And it makes me think about something you mentioned earlier about how Chan's book, it's not exactly passive reading material.
Right.
He's asking some hard questions.
Yeah, he is.
And it seems like one of the biggest ones is about this whole idea of crazy love, which just happens to be the title of chapter 3.
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious, what's your take on like how Chan uses that phrase crazy love? What does he mean by that?
Well, I think Chan wants us to see that God's love for us is radically different from anything we usually experience in this world,
Right.
And he starts that chapter by getting really honest about his own upbringing, about how his relationship with his father was actually pretty distant.
Mm-hmm.
And he says that, like, for a long time, that's kind of how he viewed God, more out of fear than love.
Which, if you think about it, is how a lot of people see God, right?
Sadly, yes. But then Chan talks about becoming a father himself, about the, like, overwhelming love he feels for his kids.
Yeah.
And how that experience kind of gave him this glimpse into, like, God's love.
Okay.
It's like he finally understood that God doesn't love us because he has to, or because we've, like, earned it somehow,
Right.
but simply because it's in his nature to love.
And like, even when your kids totally mess up and you're frustrated.
You still love them, like, no matter what.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
But, and here's the difference, and it's a big one. Our love, even as parents, it's always flawed, always conditional in some way.
Right.
But God's love, it's pure, it's unconditional.
Yeah.
It's this, like, relentless pursuit of our hearts, even when we mess up, even when we push him away.
Wow.
That's why he calls it crazy love, because it makes no logical sense. It flies in the face of everything we think we know about love.
Yeah, it makes you wonder how we could experience that kind of love and not be changed by it, right?
And yet, as we all know, that doesn't always happen. Which brings us to chapter 4, where Chan dives into this idea of lukewarm Christianity. It's almost like he's saying, okay, you've glimpsed God's crazy love. Now let's talk about what happens when we don't let that love transform us. What are your thoughts on that? What are some of the, like, signs of lukewarm Christianity that really hit home for you?
Oh, man. There are so many good ones.
Right.
It's funny, you read the phrase lukewarm Christian and you think, oh, that's not me, I'm all in.
Right.
But the way Chan describes it, it's like, it's a lot sneakier than that, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, one that comes to mind is this idea of, like, compartmentalizing.
Okay.
Chan talks about how lukewarm people, they often want to be saved from the penalty of sin, like, fire and brimstone,
Right.
but not necessarily from sin itself.
It's like they want the benefits of the relationship with God without actually doing the hard work of, like, letting go of those things that are holding them back.
It's like you want to go to heaven, but you don't want to change your address. Right. You've got to...
Exactly.
You can't just, like, dip your toe in the water. You got to jump in.
Exactly. Yeah, and another one he talks about, it's this tendency to be, like, inspired by stories of radical faith, but then not actually live them out ourselves. You know?
Yeah.
We love hearing about people who've given up everything to follow Jesus, who are, doing these amazing world-changing things.
Right.
But then we go back to our own lives and, like, nothing changes,
We're armchair activists of the faith. We're cheering from the sidelines, but we're not actually going to, like, step onto the field ourselves. Yeah, it's like we think those stories are meant to, like, entertain us, not convict us.
Right.
And that ties into another big one that Chan talks about, which is comparing ourselves to the world instead of to Jesus.
Ooh.
Right?
Yeah.
Think about it, like, when we measure our morality against the world's standards, it's pretty easy to feel good about ourselves.
Especially in this day and age, right? It's like, well, at least I'm not that guy or whatever.
Right. But, like, the problem is we're not called to be, like, slightly better than the worst of humanity.
Right.
We're called to be like Jesus.
Right.
And that changes everything.
Yeah, it's like that C.S. Lewis quote, aim at heaven and you'll get earth thrown in, aim at earth and you'll get neither.
Exactly. And that's what Chan's getting at, I think, with that whole idea of saving leftovers to a holy God.
Yeah, it's such a powerful image.
Yeah.
Because it's like, are we giving God our first and best,
Right.
or are we just, like, kind of squeezing him in when it's convenient? It's like
Right.
saying, here, God, you can have what's left of my time and my energy,
Yeah.
After I'm done with everything and everyone else that I think is more important.
Right.
When you put it that way, it's kind of heartbreaking, isn't it?
It is. Because here's the thing. It's not about what we do for God out of obligation. It's about what flows naturally from a heart that's truly captivated by his crazy love, right?
Right.
When we get even just a glimpse of, like, how big and how good and how loving God really is, it changes everything. It makes us want to give him not just our leftovers, but the very best of who we are and what we have.
You've given me a lot to think about today. I really appreciate your insights.
It's been fun.
And for you listening, as you continue to wrestle with these ideas from crazy love, I want to leave you with this. Just imagine for a moment that you could actually live each day with the unshakable certainty that God is as real and as present in your life as your best friend, as your closest confidant. Like, how would that change your perspective, not just on your faith, but on everything.